Spread out around Chicago are the cemeteries that serve as the final resting place for the wide range of people that shape the Windy City. These cemeteries vary in size, age, and setting, and represent different religious affiliations. Within their gates are former politicians, sports figures, celebrities, and changemakers, right beside the graves of thousands of everyday people who once called Chicago home. This video showcases 10 of the most famous grave sites in 10 of the most prominent Chicago cemeteries. These sites are visited by bike while traveling to all corners of Chicagoland.
It's October in Chicago, and in this video, we're going to go biking around the city, seeking out graves of 10 of the most notable Chicagoans of all time. It's going to take us to all different types of cemeteries to see graves from people from all different facets of Chicago history.
The cemetery tour of Chicagoland begins in Forest Home Cemetery in Forest Park, Illinois. Forest Park is home to 6 major cemeteries that contain the remains of over 800,000 people. This number is over 55 times the living population. Forest Home is the largest of these cemeteries, containing over 188,000 graves over 220,000 acres. It sits along the Des Plaines River and was once a Potawatomi village and burial ground. Forest Home contains a wide range of statues and mausoleums from the late 1800s along its winding roads. Forest Home was founded in 1876 and oversaw the dedication of the Haymarket Memorial in 1893. This monument displays a bronze statue depicting a woman representing justice placing a wreath on the head of a fallen worker. It was erected to memorialize the Haymarket Affair of 1886, in which 7 police officers and 4 civilians were killed. The remains of 7 of the 8 individuals who were convicted for their role in the Haymarket incident are buried at the memorial. The next cemetery lies to the west of Forest Park in the suburb of Hillside, which is home to Mount Carmel Catholic Cemetery. This cemetery, which is across the street from Queen of Heaven Cemetery, totals 214 acres and is home to over 226,000 graves, with over 800 added annually. Opened in 1901, the cemetery is the final resting place of many Italians. In addition to the headstones containing thousands of Italian names, there are high concentrations of mausoleums along the roads in Mount Carmel. This Mount Carmel Cemetery, it is a tour de force of Italian last names. The most notable grave at Mount Carmel is that of Alphonse L. Capone, which sits right to the right of the front entry gates on Wolf Road. Al Capone died on January 25, 1947 at the age of 48 while living at his estate in Miami Beach, Florida. His cause of death was cardiac arrest after suffering a stroke and pneumonia, after a decade of health deterioration due to untreated syphilis, which also caused cognitive decline. Capone was initially buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery on the south side of Chicago. However, he was moved to Mount Carmel in 1950, 3 years after his death, along with his father. It is speculated that the family wanted a more prestigious burial location that could include more members of the Capone family. The existing plot contains over a dozen headstones with the Capone name.
So this is the big one, Alphonse L. Capone. I'd say he's one of the most famous Chicagoans worldwide. I'd say him, Michael Jordan, and Barack Obama, top 3 worldwide. Al Capone, it's good visiting you. I can't believe it's taken me 50 years to see you, to see your gravesite.
Mount Carmel also holds the remains of numerous of Al Capone's mafia associates. Capone's enforcer and successor, Frank Nitti, is buried nearby. Frank shot himself in the head in the suburb of Riverside in 1943 when a lengthy prison sentence seemed imminent. He was 57 years old. Sam Giancana lies in a large mausoleum on a prominent corner in Mount Carmel. Giancana was the head of the Chicago outfit between 1957 and 1966. He was shot to death in his Oak Park home in 1976 at the age of 67. On the other end of the spectrum, Mount Carmel is also home to the Bishop's Mausoleum, which stands on a small hill in the center of the cemetery. Completed in 1912, this mausoleum holds the remains of 8 former heads of the Chicago Archdiocese, including Cardinal Joseph Bernardine, who headed the Chicago Archdiocese from 1982 until his death in 1996.
So I got really lucky. I got led into the bishop's mausoleum. And so any bishop who's been head of the archdiocese gets to be interred in this absolutely beautiful mausoleum. What a treat. to be allowed into this absolutely gorgeous mausoleum.
Riding north nearly 20 miles via the Salt Creek Trail to the suburb of Des Plaines brings a tour to All Saints Catholic Cemetery. Opened in 1923, the grounds span 257 acres and over 132,000 people are buried here. Most famous of the remains in All Saints Cemetery is legendary broadcasting icon Harry Caray.
Holy cow! I've made it to Harry Caray's grave. It's like the worst Harry Caray impression ever. Anyhow, he's a beloved Chicagoan. There's not a lot of people who didn't like Harry Caray. And just a fun-loving lover of baseball and life. And beer. So anyhow, it's a good one to visit.
For 27 years, Harry Caray was a play-by-play announcer in Chicago. First with the Chicago White Sox, and then the Chicago Cubs. He made his name singing the seventh inning stretch, drinking beers in the bleachers with fans, and with his everyday fan demeanor, who wore his heart on his sleeve.
Everybody, on one, on two, on three, take me out to the...
Prior to the start of the 1998 season, Harry was having a Valentine's Day dinner with his wife Dutchie in Rancho Mirage, California. He suffered a heart attack during the dinner and was put into intensive care. His condition worsened, and he died 4 days later on February 18, 1998, at the age of 83. His funeral was held just 3 days after his death at Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago, and he was subsequently buried at All Saints Cemetery.
Sure as God made green apples, someday the Chicago Cubs are going to be in the World Series, and maybe sooner than we think.
All Saints also holds the remains of Ray Meyer, legendary DePaul Blue Demons basketball coach. Meyer coached the team for 42 years, retiring in 1984. He died at the age of 92 in 2006. Westlawn Cemetery is a prominent Jewish cemetery in the suburb of Norwich. Established in 1937, it spans 72 acres and is the final resting place of 46,000 individuals. One resident of note is Gene Siskel, who came to fame through his role as co-host of the show Siskel and Ebert, which ran between 1975 and 1999.
Found Gene Siskel. He's got a headstone that's a little more elaborate than the other ones, but still pretty modest. I liked Siskel better than Ebert. He seemed a little more friendly. Big Bulls fan in the late 90s. You couldn't watch a playoff game of the Bulls, early 90s, without seeing Siskel courtside pumping his fist. Anyhow, to Gene Siskel, thumbs up.
He was diagnosed with an aggressive form of brain cancer in 1998 and died about a year later in February 1999 at the age of 53. Despite their famous squabbling over the movies they reviewed, Roger Ebert was in attendance at the funeral.
I thought the kid was generic mop top, and I thought that the Home Alone...
Come on, that kid?
Yes.
Come on.
Yeah, there are only two kids.
He's very good.
Culkin's better. And the other thing is, it's the same plot as the first one, only more bumps to the head.
Other notable graves at Westlawn include Jack Ruby, who died in 1967 at the age of 55 from complications of lung cancer. Ruby was in custody while awaiting a new trial for the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald at the time of his death. Ironically, he died in Parkland Memorial Hospital, the same place that both Oswald and John F. Kennedy died. Children's author Shel Silverstein's grave is also at Westlawn. Silverstein died in May of 1999 of a heart attack at the age of 66 while living in Key West, Florida. He chose to be buried in the Chicago area where he was born and raised. St. Adalbert Cemetery is located on the northwest side of Chicago and was formerly known as the Old Bohemian Cemetery due to its founding by Polish and Czech immigrants in Chicago. As such, it holds the remains of over 300,000 people with Slavic ancestry across the 250-acre site. Most notably is the mausoleum that holds the grave of George Halas, who was raised in a Czech-speaking household. George Halas died at the age of 88 in 1983. He was a key founder of the NFL and the Chicago Bears in 1920. He would go on to coach the team for 40 seasons, winning 8 championships. He was also the owner of the team for 63 years and hired Mike Ditka as coach prior to his death. This hiring paved the way for the most dominant team of all time that would go on to win the Super Bowl just 2 years after Halas' death.
We are the Bears, shuffling crew, shuffling on down, doing it for you. We're so bad, we know we're good, blowing your mind like we knew we would.
So right behind me is the mausoleum for the Hallis family. There's 8 people in there, all from the Hallis family. George is on top, that side, 4 up. So thank you for the NFL, George Hallis. And on the flip side, you've given me a lifetime of unmet expectations and disappointment from the Chicago Bears franchise. But it's a fun ride. I'll keep on doing it.
Hallis is buried alongside 7 members of the Hallis family on the east side of the cemetery just off Milwaukee Avenue. The next cemetery on the tour is on the shores of Lake Michigan and Sheridan Road in the progressive suburb of Evanston, which is owned by the Archdiocese of Chicago and was founded in 1859 in land which was then on the outskirts of Chicago. It is home to over 50,000 graves and contains a Gothic-style arched limestone entrance gate. Just north of the entrance gate lies the mausoleum for Charles Comiskey, founder and owner of the Chicago White Sox and namesake of the White Sox Stadium until 2002. Charles Comiskey was born in Chicago in 1859. After a professional baseball career, he founded the White Sox in 1900 as part of the newly formed American League. Under his ownership, the White Sox won the World Series in 1906 and 1917. The 1919 season saw the infamous Black Sox scandal, in which shoeless Joe Jackson and others on the team were accused of intentionally losing the World Series.
Why'd you wait so long to spill it, Joe?
Hard guy.
What's that?
Because the Swede is a hard guy.
Joe! Say it ain't so, Joe. Say it ain't so.
I'm at the Comiskey Mausoleum. 6 Comiskeys are in there, including Charles Comiskey, who brought us the Chicago White Sox. Similar to Hallis, it's been a blessing and a curse. A lot of unmet expectations, a lot of disappointments.
Despite the tarnished legacy, Comiskey would own the team until his death of a heart attack at 72 years old in 1931. Another prominent grave at Calvary is that of the first female mayor of Chicago, Jane Byrne. Byrne was elected in 1979 as a reform-minded outsider and served 1 4-year term as head of Chicago. She shined a light on the poor living conditions in Chicago housing projects and lost her re-election bid in 1983. She died in 2014 at the age of 81. Heading south into the city of Chicago, the next cemetery is Rosehill Cemetery. At 350 acres, Rosehill is the largest cemetery in Chicago and sits along Ravenswood Avenue and the railroad tracks that head north from Chicago to Wisconsin. Rosehill was founded in 1859 by Chicago businessmen who wanted to create a non-denominational cemetery that would serve as the final resting place for prominent Chicagoans. The front gates are in limestone and in a Gothic revival style, and give way to a garden-style cemetery that became popular in the 1800s. And were designed to be beautiful with winding paths, old-growth trees, water features, statuary, and many monuments. Rosehill succeeds on all of these counts while providing a beautiful setting that houses the remains of many of the icons who built Chicago. Oscar Mayer and Ignaz Schwinn are 2 such examples, who are both buried in the grounds beside stunning monuments of all shapes and sizes. In the southwest corner of the cemetery sits the massive Rosehill Mausoleum. This mausoleum was opened in the early 1900s and is said to house over 13,000 crypts. It has been expanded on numerous occasions in the years since and contains elaborate stonework, stained glass, and chapels that are all open to the public to explore. The mausoleum houses the remains of many prominent Chicagoans, including John G. Shedd, former president of Marshall Field and namesake of the Shedd Aquarium.
So I'm in the Rosehill Mausoleum, and this place is massive. You just walk right in, and there's really no one in here. It's multiple levels, all different rooms that you could just kind of go in and see the people who are inside.
Also buried in the mausoleum are former mail-order retail business rivals Richard Sears and Aaron Montgomery Ward. Montgomery Ward started his retail empire in 1872, and Sears entered the market 20 years later in 1893. Sears introduced a flashier and more innovative approach that allowed the Sears Company to overtake Montgomery Ward in the mail-order industry. Ward died in 1913 at the age of 69, and Sears died the following year at the age of 50. Ironically, the remains of the two former rivals are just a short distance apart within the Rosehill Mausoleum.
So this mausoleum is really wild. I think I'm the only one in here. It's massive. It's a cemetery into itself. And here I'm at Montgomery Ward's room. It's locked. You can't go inside. But huge preservationist advocate for the Chicago lakefront. The lakefront path, Grant Park, it's all because of Montgomery Ward. So a huge influence on what Chicago is today.
2.5 miles south of Rosehill Cemetery sits what is probably the most famous cemetery in Chicago, Graceland. Founded in 1860, Graceland is also a garden-style cemetery that features a small lake that is surrounded by the graves of some of the most prominent builders in Chicago's history. Potter Palmer, George Pullman, Louis Sullivan, Mies van der Rohe, and Daniel Burnham all have monuments situated along this lake. Daniel Burnham's grave sits on a small island that is connected by a footbridge.
I kind of like the grave of Daniel Burnham. The man who said, "Make no small plans." Pretty basic grave. Just a big rock with a plaque on it. Nothing too intricate. It's on a beautiful setting. It's on this island with this lake where, you know, there's just heavy hitters of Chicago history buried all around the lake. But Daniel Burnham's, he's on a little island in the lake. So kind of a prominent position for the one of the architects of Chicago's lakefront.
In addition to the graves of prominent Chicago builders, Graceland also is the home to the graves of two baseball legends, one from the south side and one from the north side. Minnie Minoso played for the White Sox between 1951 and 1964. Born in Cuba, Minoso first played in the Negro Leagues and was one of the first Afro-Latino players in Major League history. Famously, he made appearances in 2 games in 1976 and 1 in 1980, giving him the distinction of playing in 5 decades.
Here's Minnie Minoso! Minnie Minoso! Ground ball to the shortstop, the third baseman. He'll be out. Look at Minnie run down that line at 58 years of age. Listen to the crowd. He really hustled down that line. I think he can beat some of the players.
Across the lake from Minoso is the grave of Chicago Cubs legend Ernie Banks. Mr. Cub died in 2015, just 2 months before Minnie Minoso. Banks played for the Cubs for 19 years, between 1953 and 1971. During that span, he made 14 All-Star appearances, was a 2-time MVP, and hit 512 home runs. Banks lived on the south side of Chicago in the later years of his life and was very tied to the Chicago community and the Chicago Cubs until his death at the age of 83 from heart failure.
Mr. Cub, Ernie Banks. Let's play 2. Really a likable guy, Ernie Banks. Died in 2015, 1 year before the Cubs won it all. So kind of a shame that he didn't get to see the Cubs win a World Series in his lifetime, but hopefully he was watching from above and enjoyed the outcome.
Traveling south along Lake Michigan brings a tour to the mausoleum of Stephen Douglas at 35th Street and Lakeshore Drive. Douglas served as senator in Illinois between 1847 and 1861. He is most famous for his debates with Abraham Lincoln during their race for Illinois Senate in 1858. Douglas won the Senate contest and would go on to run as a Democrat in the 1860 presidential election. However, Lincoln avenged his loss from the previous race and won the 1860 presidential contest as the Republican nominee. Douglas would go on to die just 1 year later at the age of 48 from pneumonia at the very beginning of the Civil War. Initially buried in Rosehill Cemetery, his remains were moved to the current monument and mausoleum in 1881. Where his statue atop the 93-foot pedestal has looked out over Lake Michigan in the years since. The park in which the monument and mausoleum sits is open Thursday through Sunday between April and October. and is accessible to the lakefront path via the 35th Street pedestrian bridge.
Sorry, folks, we're closed for 2 weeks to clean and repair America's favorite family fun park. Sorry.
What? I'm at Stephen A. Douglas's tomb that currently not open too often. Only Thursday through Sunday, April to October. November to March, completely closed. So it kind of seems unnecessarily closed. Don't think many people are visiting it. But I can't get in today. But I got some good drone footage.
On the south side of Chicago sits Oak Cemetery. Founded in 1853, Oak Woods is of a similar style to Graceland and Rosehill, with 4 small lakes within its grounds. The cemetery houses the remains of over 4,000 Confederate soldiers who died while being held at the nearby Camp Douglas prison. Camp Douglas was situated north of Oak Cemetery and operated as a prisoner of war camp between 1862 and 1865. The Confederate soldiers who died from disease while being held at the prison were initially buried on the premises. However, were moved to the mound at Oak Woods in 1866. The current 46-foot-tall monument was erected and dedicated in 1895. It contains the names of the 4,000-plus soldiers who are buried beneath it and is topped by a statue that depicts the typical appearance of the soldier buried at its base. Oak Woods is also the final resting place of some of the most prominent names in the history of the civil rights movement. The mausoleum for Chicago's first African-American mayor, Harold Washington, sits along the water's edge of one of the lakes in the cemetery. Washington was elected mayor in 1983 and served until his death in 1987 at the age of 65 of a heart attack while at his City Hall desk. The grave of Ida B. Wells sits off one of the winding roads of the cemetery. Born into slavery in Mississippi in 1862, she lost both parents by the age of 16. She was the oldest of 8 children and became responsible for raising her younger siblings. She would go on to be a teacher, journalist, and a fierce civil rights and anti-lynching advocate. She died in 1931 at the age of 68 from kidney failure while living on the south side of Chicago. The most widely known grave at Oak Woods is that of 1936 gold medal Olympian Jesse Owens. Owens came to fame during the Berlin Games of 1936 when he won 4 gold medals in the pre-World War II rise of Nazi Germany. Owens' dominance was seen as a rebuke to Hitler's propaganda regarding the superiority of the Aryan race. After the Games, Owens made Chicago home while working in broadcasting, public relations, and other entrepreneurial endeavors. Owens chose to be buried in Oak Cemetery and now sits on the edge of one of the lakes with a headstone befitting of this great Olympic champion.
This is a great grave. You don't really think of Jesse Owens as a Chicagoan, but after the 1936 Olympics, he found his way to Chicago and spent over a decade here. The monument behind me is a rather newer addition. Money was raised by his 3 daughters, which I believe are still alive, all in their 90s and still alive. They run a Jesse Owens Foundation, and they raised money for a grave that's more, a monument that's more befitting of his life.
The graves and cemeteries featured in this video are just a few amongst the countless throughout the Chicagoland region. Together, they offer tranquil grounds in every corner of the region, filled with the graves of the people that built the great city of Chicago that we all now get to enjoy.